This is Barrie, a city constantly evolving. At any time, a whole host of pressures challenge the intricate tapestry of city government. In this series, we will explore the priorities deemed essential for progress, even if they don't always inspire unanimous applause. Join me each week for a candid conversation with a member of our city government as we uncover the stories behind the scenes of Barrie, a city on the move. Welcome to Barrie City on the Move. I'm your host, Arif Khan, and it's my pleasure to be joining you wherever you're receiving this content, online, streaming, YouTube, etc. I'm glad you're here. In this series, we aim to explore the relationship between city governance and operations, as well as the dynamic relationship with the many partners that the city interacts with, all with the goal towards delivering a great quality of life for the residents of the city of Barrie. So thanks for joining. In this episode, I have the pleasure of having a conversation with Mayor Alex Nuttal, Mayor of the city of Barrie. And Mayor, thanks for once again taking your time to join me on Barrie City on the Move.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me today, and obviously I love these conversations, and I think it's a good back and forth that allows us to really dive into some meaty topics.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you, during sort of over the course of the numerous episodes that we've had so far, I've been getting a lot of feedback from residents who are basically saying, you know, thanks for opening up City Hall, thanks for giving us a better understanding of some of those working relationships and you know, a lot of the what goes on in order to make life happen for us. Some of the things that we really don't take into consideration on a daily basis, but we almost assume or expect or maybe take for granted.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, one of the learnings that I look back over the last couple of years is how much goes into each thing that happens, you know, inside of the city, whether that's clearing the streets like this morning from snow, or looking at the gardens, or perhaps it's the waste and dump site. You know, there's so much that goes into each aspect of keeping the city going, and there's a lot of really incredible folks that do the work.
There truly are. And you know, the other thing that really comes to mind is no one department or no one topic sort of stands in isolation. Yeah. And right now we are at just a pretty incredible place and time in what will eventually become history. When it comes to the relationships, not only that we have locally and, you know, the status quo of how we've operated and how we've come to sort of develop these relationships and these policies and protocols, and then suddenly something sort of seemingly out of left field that we might have not been prepared for catches us off guard. And so what I want to talk with you right now is we've just gone through a provincial election. And Premier Ford and the Progressive Conservatives have sort of retained their majority in government. And I think it's worth exploring, you know, what were you thinking as a mayor and head of council and amongst your council colleagues, and maybe in operation conversations with director level, should there have been a change, what might have you been planning for, or now that we've maintained the course, is there a sense of relief, or is there, or what are you planning for going forward in terms of forecasting?
Well, I think it's always difficult when there's changing government halfway through, working through a whole bunch of big ticket items. You know, when you think about what the city of Barrie has been working on in the last number of years, we've got obviously the border, working to get more industrial land together for the city of Barrie. There's looking at the housing and the funds that need to come into the city of Barrie to support housing, affordable housing. There's a relationship with the County of Simcoe and how we're going to continue to deliver the social services in this city. And all of those interact very directly with the provincial government. And so, you know, I was pretty clear on my position for the provincial election. I thought that the provincial government has been good for the city of Barrie, and I can, you know, really quantify that. In the days before the election, we had an announcement of around $34 million to support new sewer and water and roads in Southwest Barrie. Then we had another announcement of about $18.5 million, and I'm going on memory, so maybe I don't have the exact amounts, but it's within $1 million one way or another. for the expansion of Mapleview Drive in Southeast Barrie. And these are big investments that just haven't happened over the last 15 years. And you've been paying attention to municipal politics and provincial politics as well as I have. And the reality is these are new things that we have not seen before. And that's because we have a good relationship with our partners at the provincial level. And I think it's important that that continue for the next couple of years, few years here, so that we can get through this difficult time when it comes to the economy. Things costing too much to purchase, like homes, and there not being enough really good, strong paying career jobs in our region. That's why the 400's so clogged up. That's why the GO train's so clogged up. So I think there's a lot of work that we've been doing with the province, and I didn't want to see a change and start from scratch.
Okay, so I actually want to dive a little bit deeper into that with you, if you will. You spent obviously some time on council, and we were colleagues there for a period of time. You went into federal politics, so you've got some experience and you're familiar with how that works in terms of the relationship between federal infrastructure funding or the relationship between municipalities and the federal government. Now obviously you're dealing on a regular basis with the province and the Premier's office. And you said a concern of yours would have been to be 2 years into a mandate that you had, be making progress, and then potentially see some of that funding or a lot of that funding cut off. My question to you, if you can just sort of give our audience a little bit more insight, when the city picks a project or a priority that needs its attention, let's talk about sewer and water since you brought that up. What ability does the city have to manage or go forward with that project independently?
Well, I'll give you the example of Southwest Barrie, where we had the $34.5 million. It's putting pipe and road down Huronia Road and then across Mackay to kind of connect the east and west sides of the 400 and get the things we don't like to talk about down to the waste plant. And so, we had a target date, I think, of 2029 for that work to happen. We now have a target date of 2025 for that work to begin. So you can see that that's a 4-year head start we're getting. And the big thing for the city of Barrie is, yes, there's housing over there. But the big thing for the city of Barrie that we are just hurting so badly on is that we don't have enough truly industrial land. And that's where that land is, right? So we need to get sewer and water over there so that we can turn on these industrial lands, so that we can attract the businesses and corporations that are going to provide great jobs for people who live in Barrie. And so a 4-year setback, that's 4 more years where we don't have people working in Barrie. It's 4 more years where we don't have people being able to get into housing in Barrie. And it's 4 more years of increased inflation and the cost going up, meaning it becomes more and more difficult to get that job done because it becomes more and more expensive over time. And
in addition, there's the lost opportunity of those extra 4 years.
Absolutely.
To put things into perspective, though, is it fair to say that a municipality with its municipal governance is an extension of the provincial government?
Yeah, I believe so. When you look at the structure of how governance works in Canada, you have the federal government. And the federal government, the provinces, they're both recognized inside the Constitution. Municipalities are not recognized. We are an extension of the province. I like to say that the province, they're mom and dad, and we are the children. And so when they set a direction or a target, it's our job to find a way to make that work, both meeting that target and also on the ground in our community.
On an annual basis, we have an approximate $600 million budget to work with, and we have about $3 billion worth of infrastructure projects.
Well, it's going down because we're getting things built, so that's the good news. And it also is going down because the province keeps giving us money, so that the delta that we're looking at in terms of the cost of infrastructure is actually getting better. The overall city budget, I think, was in the neighborhood of a $700 million capital budget this year. That includes projects that are multi-year, so you approve it once, but it carries forward into multiple years. And so there's a huge budget that we put together and a huge plan that's being carried out in the community. And one of the things that I focused on in the last election, I've focused on since I was elected, is to get these roads fixed. And sometimes that creates some difficulty while they're being fixed, but they're getting fixed for the first time in a very long time. So the capital plan is, as we say, robust, and it is a big plan that's happening everywhere around the city all at once.
Well, one of the topics that comes up when you're looking to attract business and investment to the region is logistics, is the ability to move that freight or supplies, et cetera. And if I'm not mistaken, that has been on the short list of items of why companies may not have chosen Barrie as a region to invest in.
Well, I think one of the things that we failed to do in the city of Barrie is to take advantage of the rail that we have, right? You know, we've got a 400 highway. It's a bit of a spoiled position to have. You know, you've got this wonderful connection to the north and to the south. You know, and we like to say we're halfway to Muskoka. You know, from where? From the biggest market in Canada and one of the biggest markets in North America. And so that comes with some great advantages. It also comes with some challenges. And I think what we need to do is get the logistics onto freight rail, get more jobs closer to home to eliminate some of that traffic on the highway, and also allow the freight that needs to be on trucks to move more freely. And so I think those are longer term conversations. But they're conversations we've been having since I was elected, I mean, sitting down with you here, in that we need to make sure that we have folks working in Barrie and area. It's so important.
So let's have this conversation, because there is this elephant in the room right now, and that is our neighbor to the south.
Yeah.
And you came out quite strong with some initiatives that you shared with council, and I think you did something that might be unprecedented for you, certainly in office. You actually put your support behind the premier in this last provincial election, and that, I think that did catch some people's attention.
Yeah, it was a no-brainer to me. When you're receiving the type of funding we're receiving, we have not received. You know, when we're able to get to the table to ask that, please, Mr. Premier, don't proceed with an injection site here. Don't let your team do this here. Please focus on helping these individuals get long-term help and rehabilitation. Well, you look what's happened over the last 18 months. We don't have an injection site, and we do have a rehab center coming. These are important things, and they're city-defining things. And the fact that we can get into the provincial government to be able to get the answers that we're looking for, to move the city in a direction that's good for our long-term health, I think it's a pretty enviable position to have.
So when we come back from the break, I do want to pick this up, because I think we're going to transition, obviously, into the conversation into, you know, do we have the right person at Queen's Park who's working with you collaboratively? I'm going to plant you the question right now to address the challenge. You talked about rail, you talked about logistics, you talked about manufacturing, and then we have to get into the conversation around tariffs. Mm-hmm. So just we'll leave you with that while we go to break. But when we come back from break, I'll be back with Mary Nuttal, and we're going to talk about the impact of that. We just talked about manufacturing, the impact, and yes, of course, we're going to talk about the federal election as well. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and Alex Nuttal, Mayor of the City of Barrie, and I having a great conversation around, well, forecasting, really, taking a look at where we are, taking stock of where we are, the numerous relationships that have to get taken into consideration in order to be successful. And I think at the you have to, everything that you do, there has to be an outcome that you're working towards, and that is to, as far as I've heard you say, quality of life and a place to do business, a place to raise a family in the city of Barrie. We do get into the weeds and we do get into the minutia, but all of that is part of the overall equation. Last segment we were talking about the relationship between the city and the province and the codependency of executing upon that larger plan. All people in some form of an elected position are there to deliver for the residents and the people they serve. We started talking about what cannot be taken for granted as the investment that the city of Barrie has received through a strong and healthy relationship with the province to move some of these otherwise delayed, deferred, forgotten projects forward. Those are my words. I think that's how I interpreted what I heard you say. We can't help but have this conversation around the impact that I think some are saying suddenly January 20th everything changed. And from my perspective, I guess I'll ask it as a question. Do you actually believe that suddenly everything changed on January 20th? Or do you believe that maybe there was some writing on the wall?
Well, I think the president kind of, tried to say what was going to happen in November, December. And we really didn't know what to make of it as Canadians. And I don't think that we've done a good job of positioning ourselves to be able to withstand an economic assault from the U.S. I don't think we ever imagined that it would happen. But that's on us. And the next steps, how we respond, I think we have a unique opportunity here right now to be able to redefine what the relationship with the U.S. is, redefine what our relationship around the world is, redefine what our relationship amongst our provinces are, and at the same time, really come to terms with how we want to use our natural resources to create jobs in Canada. Because part of this is that we seem to be very good at using our natural resources to create jobs in the United States. And that's not necessarily a bad thing unless they have a president and leader who goes down a pretty protectionist road.
So, looking out for the best interest of those here in Barrie, and we do have a relatively heavy influence in terms of the automotive sector here in Barrie and surrounding area, but certainly whether it's auto manufacturing, components and parts manufacturing, et cetera, directly in Barrie, and or residents who live in Barrie who are maybe working slightly outside of Barrie, whether it's in Alliston, et cetera, there's a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
Tariffs, the border. I don't know if I necessarily knew this, but something that I've learned in the last couple of months is the number of times a vehicle may cross the border back and forth. It's not once. It's not just we build it here and we send it there. It could be, I thought the number was 8. You're telling me 20. Okay, so that's even more
Some
than
parts go back and forth that many times. So if you think about it, when we're looking at, the City of Barrie's auto sector, and we provide let's say lots of parts are created here that are then taken to Honda. Honda puts them in a vehicle, and that vehicle ends up being somewhere, right? In order for those things to happen properly, it requires multiple businesses on both sides of the border to contribute. And that's been interrupted, right? It looks like it's going to be further interrupted at the start of this coming month. And so, there's a lot of logistics, going back to what we were previously talking about, that go into the creation of these vehicles, which are basically tech with a structure around them these days, and it's very interrupted. It's created a ton of instability inside of our economy, and I think that there's a point where we have to pivot here and say we need to look internally rather than externally. Why? Because we have the levers of control internally to create stability where we don't with the relationship with the U.S.
There are a number of things that you said. I'm going to try and make sure that we touch on all of them. Recent statistics say that upwards of 75% of all Canadians are uncertain about their job security or about the future of their small business. And we can look at the fact that we have the highest debt to income ratio in history. It's almost 1.9 to 1 ratio of debt. That means additional borrowing on credit, additional borrowing on lines of credit, pulling equity, and just uncertainty around repayment, or do I still have a job? That must weigh pretty heavily on a mayor.
Well, I think that there's only so much you can do at the municipal level on that subject. The you look at the provincial and federal governments, the amount of money that they're spending, the kind of deficit era we've gone through over the past number of years. In fact, I think on the provincial level, we almost got to balancing the budget, which it does not look like we're going that direction because of the Canada-US issues. And you look at the effect on mortgages, people's jobs, etc. There's no question it has an effect on the city, but there's not a lot we can do to control that. What we can do is we can control our own finances, and we can do everything we can to make sure that we're positioned properly. We're keeping debt low, we're spending on capital items that create jobs in the community, and we've held the operating budget in the city of Barrie. All of those are positive things for taxation, keeping it down, that investment in hard infrastructure, again, creating jobs, and keeping our debt capacity in a very low place compared to most other municipalities.
I'm actually going to just jump in though and say I think we had you on not so long ago, just a couple months ago, announcing the relationship with the university, coming and bringing a STEM hub to Barrie, and one of the ideas behind that was to ensure that we keep the intellectual capital, or give greater opportunity to
locally.
retain the intellectual capital locally. You mentioned that we may or may not have control here, but one of the things that does come to mind, though, you also mentioned that maybe we were too heavily reliant, and you said it's our fault. I think the words that came out our fault with the U.S. Not Barrie, but Canadians versus the U.S. or with relations with the U.S. We've got more than one trading partner in the world, and we have an opportunity for more than one trading partner in the world.
Yeah, I want to be very clear. I'm not blaming the citizens, right? This is a government problem. And the problem that the government's created is this, that our natural resources are going south. The roads are built to go south, right? And, it comes north as part of these parts manufacturers that we've been talking about, but only after the natural resources have been turned into whatever they're being turned into. And that's an issue. When you think about oil, it's the easiest one. We all identify it with Canada. It goes south, gets refined in the United States, and then gets sold back to us at a massive profit while keeping their gas prices lower. We bring in oil from around the world, including places that don't share our democratic values, when instead we should refine our own product. And we should be supporting other countries around the world that do share our democratic values and principles. We should be doing business with them. If it's not the US right now, right, then we should be focusing on Europe. We should be focusing on Asia, our partners there, and finding ways to move east-west instead of just south. Because when we go south, we know that we've put ourselves in this position where we have one customer, and I've said this 100 times. If you only have one customer, then you aren't running a business. You're an employee of whoever that customer is. If you have many customers, then you're running a business, and nobody can lever you or push you into a really bad place or a poor place or position, like we're being pushed right now.
I think a great case in point, not at a government level, but more on a capitalist and corporate level, would have been Rubbermaid's mistake with Walmart, or Magnafox's mistake with Walmart, where they allowed those very heavy criteria to essentially make them an employee of, and it killed them.
Yeah.
It took them right out of business. One of the things that it comes to mind, though, is that the Premier took a stance regarding whether you want to refer to it as retaliatory tariffs or matching tariff for tariffs, short and long term. And I'm going to put you in a spot here because you just talked about the healthy relationship with the Premier and the province. But what's your take? Is that a war that we can win, matching tariff for tariff, or what's if you were to give a insight, if you were to have the Premier's ear, what would you say to him?
Well, I think, so you asked my opinion first, and then I'll answer that,
Sure.
and then I would tell you what I would tell the Premier. This isn't just a war of you do this, we do that. There's a runway that's shortening every day. And that runway is that the current President of the United States only has so long where he has pretty substantive control in Congress and Senate, and also himself aligned. The second piece is that he's only going to be here for another 3 2/3 years or whatever it is at this point. And so, I think that it's important to recognize that when our government hits back with some of these retaliatory pieces, that they are also biding time. And we need to bide time in order to be able to build out the other avenues to get our products around the world. And we need time to build the infrastructure to support trade with other places around the world. So that's I think it makes sense, everything that I've seen happening to this point. The other piece is, you asked what would I say to the Premier. I think that continue being Captain Canada. We had a void. It was sad, right? And, as Ontarians, I think that we identify as Canadians first. And I think that the Premier stepped in and said, whoa, we need to protect Canadian manufacturing jobs, we need to connect Canadian natural resources, and we need to find a way to send a message back to the United States. If that's on electricity, great. If it's on other natural resources, great. If it's protecting Canadian jobs at this point from an aggressor in the United States, great. The other piece is we need to look east-west, and Ontario needs to be a major piece of that. We need to up our game around the world. We have a substantive infrastructure in Germany and Europe. We need to make sure that we're up in our game in terms of creating those trade routes to the east and west.
So with that in mind, when we come back from the break, I'd like to talk about what you and Council discussed and the direction that you've given to staff regarding, maybe we're not in control of everything, but we do have a role to play, and what example can we set here at home?
Absolutely.
Sound good? All right, so when we come back from the break, more from Mayor Alex Nuttal, Mayor of Barrie. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and Mayor Alex Nuttal and I are having a great conversation on the world that we're all experiencing right now, the many shifting parts and jockeying for position and figuring out where we are, and we're going to bring it back local to the city of Barrie as it applies to the city of Barrie. And one of the things that while we were on break I was thinking about actually, Mayor Nuttal, is this, and that is that it looks to me, and you did mention, by the way, sort of in absence of a federal leader. I actually have some questions about that, because I saw some moves in the news that sort of seemed to happen without sitting in Parliament, just sort of unilateral decisions that were being made, but we'll come back to that in a minute. But sort of that jockeying for position, actually, sort of the threat of a tariff and then the stay of execution, so to speak, and then the threat of this and so. How did you interpret that? I was sort of like, are they feeling each other out for how things might go? Is that sort of your takeaway, or what's your takeaway? In
terms of the Canada-US, both governments kind of saying they're going to do something and not, and so on and so forth.
The visit to Washington, the ambassadorial diplomatic discussions that were happening.
I think the U.S. president looks at uncertainty as a tool to take jobs from Canada, and that it isn't necessarily the tariff itself. It is setting the tone that there is uncertainty, there is instability. If you go that side of the border, you might end up with a tariff of 25%. So why would you invest there when you can invest here? Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's what we're experiencing. When I was talking about there was a void, like there was actually a void, right? Like there wouldn't have been such a strong position for Premier Ford to step into had there not been a void. Sure. Right? So that's the evidence unto itself. The executive branch of government and the provincial and federal level in terms of cabinet and the leadership have, very, very wide-ranging tools that they can use, and we saw them using that. It doesn't necessarily need Parliament or the legislature to approve many of these items because the executive branch can do that. But I will say that, the idea that the country can unite inside of the people's place, being the Parliament or the legislature, is a powerful message, because that unity in these times, I think, sends a powerful message down south where they couldn't get 60% of the folks in either house to agree on probably anything. I think that is a very strong message. and one that we need Parliament back and we need the legislature back, because we know it's coming back soon, so that we can send those messages that the people's representative, therefore the people of Canada, are united and are standing together despite political differences, despite different backgrounds and cultures, despite different earnings and those types of things, that we as Canada are going to make it through as an independent and sovereign nation, and we're not going to succumb to any sort of economic or any other type of takeover.
I think the Premier said this. I do believe even the Prime Minister said this, and I'll refer to the Prime Minister as actually Mr. Trudeau previously said this. This isn't a fight that we picked. Whether you want to refer to it as a war, it's an economic war. It's maybe not a militant war yet. And sorry for saying it even that way, but obviously sovereignty is being challenged, and the Arctic North is being challenged, and things, whether it's in jest or not, whether it's just to get under our skin or not. I mean, you threw the first punch. So bringing it back home on the things that we have control over, you mentioned in the last segment actually about looking east and west.
Yeah.
You talked obviously primarily and maybe intentionally around moving natural resources and our ability to trade with partners that we maybe may not have given as much attention as we could. There's a market for it in Europe. There's a market for it in Asia. They've been asking for natural gas. They've been asking for oil. We've so far declined, maybe for ideological purposes about wanting to be greener and more environmentally friendly, but there was a market out there. You made some decisions with Council around policy and procurement policy. And I want you to just help me out with understanding what was the impetus behind these decisions, what was the tone behind these decisions, because there are some who would say, Mayor, protectionism is a dangerous word, and in fact it might sound good short term, but the repercussions of being going protectionist, as you kind of referred to the U.S. president doing, could have some negative impact. So clarify Council's position, if you will, on that for me.
Well, the idea of free trade is that it's two-way. There's no such thing as a free trade agreement that's one way, right? And so when the U.S. Tears up our free trade agreement, brings in tariffs, targets our industries and our sectors and our farmers and our automobile manufacturing plants and really the dining room tables of every Canadian, we can't pretend we're in a free trade agreement anymore, right? That is a one-way relationship that's not going to work, out for Canada at least. So what Council's done so far, and what I've done further with strong mayor directives, is put in place a request to our procurement staff that any of our procurement going forward should have a disincentive for U.S. companies. And the reason that we don't go with buy local is because it's illegal, right? All of these folks you hear say, well, just make it so you're buying all your products and all of your contracts in within 70 kilometers or something like that, It's illegal for us.
Can I just clarify?
Yeah.
An individual such as myself or my neighbor choosing to shop local, game on.
Totally good.
Totally good. Not illegal whatsoever.
Yes.
But from an actual contractual government relationship. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, yeah, no, it's a great point. I'm speaking only for the governments at this point. So it's illegal for us to do that. We have free trade agreements with Europe, in CETA. We have close to free trade, if not absolute free trade, with the UK. I would say there's still some things that have some difficulty, but for the most part, it's a very good relationship. We have free trade agreements around the world. Like Colombia, we have a free trade agreement with. And if we were to just, make a decision one day that we're not really doing this with anyone else anymore, like that's protectionism, right? That is the definition of protectionism. What we're advocating at Council for is much different. We're saying we like free trade. It's benefited us immensely. But if free trade is not going to be respected by one of our free trade partners, we can't pretend that it's going to continue with them. But we still want to work with all these other folks that do want free trade in a robust way. And so that's what the position council's taken at this point, and that's why you won't see buy local, because it's illegal for governments to do so. We are falling under, as the City of Barrie, we fall under the agreements that our parents signed, i.e. the provinces, which signed on to each of the free trade agreements that came into effect.
Let me push one further, though.
Yeah.
Let's say it was legal.
Yeah.
Would your position be to buy local?
You know, I think that there's probably times where I would say yes and times where I would say no, and you'd have to take it down to each individual decision. You know, a lot of the time, if there's a timing metric attached to it, there becomes a need to go local because of being able to deliver whatever the need is.
So you're looking at the
timeline.
criteria.
Yes, but there's other things where, you know, like free trade has been good for us. I'll give you an example, like CETA with Europe. You look at the amount of German-owned companies that operate in the City of Barrie, the amount that are looking to now operate in the City of Barrie. These are good relationships for us. They employ. CETA is the European Free Trade Agreement.
Okay.
And so these are good things for us that have provided lots and lots of jobs in our community. Think about the German-owned companies. And Napoleon has been the benefactor of CETA on the other way, where they're taking products to Europe. And I believe that they're the #1 now barbecue device in Europe, or maybe getting very close if they're not there yet. And that's because of that agreement. Well, those products are manufactured here, they're warehoused here, and then they're sent around the globe. And it's been very, very good for the City of Barrie and for jobs locally.
So in terms of this East-West, and in terms of, in fact, even going so far as Europe, the conversation around interprovincial trade and trade barriers has come up.
Big time.
You are certainly the mayor of, one of the larger urban mayor. You're part of that LUMCO, the Large Urban Mayors Caucus, I believe, Ontario's caucus.
Big city mayors.
Big city mayors, et cetera. You've got colleagues just close to us in Brampton and Peel and other areas. The conversation around interprovincial. Actually, I don't know what percentage of Canadians actually realized we had these barriers internally.
Well, it's quite bizarre, right? And I'll go to things that I confess I know really well, okay? I enjoy having a glass of wine, okay? I go into the LCBO, and this is before the tariffs, and it's really easy to buy California wines. Right? It's easy to buy Argentinian wines. It's easy to buy South African wines. It's easy to buy Australian wines. And it's easy to buy Ontario wines. I see Italian wines as well. You know what we don't see a lot of? BC wine. Yet we know that there is a very strong market for BC wines, like really around the world. And the reason for that is these barriers that exist between the provinces. And that's just one small example. It's not all alcohol. Some of it is. The reality is it's easier to trade north-south with the U.S. than it is east-west on many products, which is bizarre. Mm-hmm. And when I say east-west, I'm not saying east-west to Europe and Asia. I'm saying east-west internally here inside of Canada. And we really, as a country, if we're going to be a unified federation, which is what the structure of our country is, we need to get rid of those barriers. And there's always good reasons why to put them up, right? And there's always bad reasons once you get there. And we're seeing what the results and the consequences of those are right now. The removal of these barriers in some cases results in a 20% reduction in costs, meaning that your economy becomes that much more productive and efficient by just removing these artificial barriers that we put up on imaginary line between Manitoba and Ontario, or between Alberta and Ontario, or BC and Ontario.
I think some could interpret it as, what would I do with that additional 20%? I could reinvest that into additional human resources or innovation, et cetera, in my business.
If you put a barrier in place where it becomes easier to buy an American product than a Canadian product, the result is those dollars, that revenue is going to the United States, right? It doesn't make it so that you still get that BC wine, just using as an example. What it actually does is it sends a dollar south. I'd like those dollars staying in Canada I'd like it supporting jobs in Canada. And you don't have to attack the U.S. to get there.
And in fact,
you can do it by removing our own internal barriers.
I'd like American dollars and British pounds or the euro coming into Canada as well.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
So, absolutely. So when we come back from the break, the next topic of conversation obviously is we're in a federal election right now. We're going to have to look at how the outcome could impact Barrie or influence Barrie and Canadians. And I'm not going to necessarily ask you to tell me who you're voting for, but I'm going to ask you to tell me what you're taking into consideration as we move forward over the next, month or so.
100%.
We'll be right back with more from Mayor Alex Nuttal after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and Mayor Alex Nuttal and I are having a conversation. And Mayor, it's actually interesting how complex this is, and yet how plain English and conversational we can be about it, because some of this is just plain logical.
100%.
And we've been talking a lot. We've been talking about the relationship with our provincial partners, and obviously the relationship and codependency there. Essentially, your endorsement of the fact that the Premier decided to stand up and fill the void that was there and would not have been there, and he wouldn't have filled if it wasn't there. But the importance of that kind of leadership and how it's impacted Barrie and allowed Barrie to keep working towards what's really good for business and residents in the city of Barrie. Certainly touched on tariffs and touched on our relationship with the South, and we're going into a federal election. Plain and simple. We are going into one. The question will be who is right to sort of take back the reins of being Captain Canada, for lack of a better analogy, and who's better to lead us through this relationship, this ever-evolving and uncertain relationship with our best friend and biggest trading partner to the South, and tap into this conversation around it, broadening our horizons. You made some policy changes and reinforced some directives within the city of Barrie to ensure that during procurement we honor and respect the relationships and the contractual agreements that we have in place. And in fact, you put somebody in timeout when they're not behaving, and that's what your policy was set to do, is to sort of give a stern warning and put the U.S. into timeout because they haven't been behaving and honoring the agreement. The other move that you made, and I think you were quite clear in the media about it, was a decision to remove the flags from our public spaces, the U.S. flag, excuse me, I should say, from our public spaces. And you actually had some interesting commentary on that.
Yeah, it was one of those things where we did it thinking that, 5 people would notice, and, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Canadians noticed. And it's kind of spread out from Barrie, Mississauga, right down through these Ontario municipalities, Winnipeg.
People in the U.S. noticed.
People in the U.S., the commentary, the amount of Americans that went on to our social media posts, which is, it's bizarre when you think about it, and said, we're so sorry. We don't support this, we're sorry. Then there was other Americans, who were saying things that, I didn't agree with, but that's okay. I think that free dialogue is good. But what kind of hit me was I was inside of one of our rec centers, and somebody came up to me and asked me the question, why is that flag there? We have a Canadian flag. Why is there a U.S. flag? And when President Trump had said in January he was going to put the tariffs in place essentially at the beginning of February, I believe, I was ready to pull the flags at that point, and didn't work out that way. And then it ended up being, I think, March 3rd or 4th that we had these tariffs begin. And the whole time I was questioning myself, like in February, why do we have these here? Like, we're a sovereign country. We have a good friend, okay? But we're a sovereign country. And the idea that we would fly the flag of the person who's trying to take food off of our table didn't make a lot of sense to me. That is not the fault of the residents of the United States. It's not the fault of the kids playing hockey on American teams. that are coming to our city. So when those folks are here, we'll put the American flag up, as is, a ritual in sports, as a sign of respect and a sign of welcome, right? Because we still welcome our American neighbors here. But when those events aren't happening, I don't want to see the flag of this nation that's trying to remove our sovereignty and our right to self-determination flying throughout our city. Doesn't make any sense.
So we're about to pick the governing party, and by extension, we're about to pick the prime minister, and by extension, the governing party. Let's put it that way. I think that's actually making more sense. And I appreciate what your thoughts are. We've got family and friends, and every one of us probably has either a family member or a friend who's living south of the border, and I realize you're not picking on that 12-year-old playing junior hockey or something like that. The other thing that really comes to mind, though, that I think is worth discussing, and it's interesting as we're going to pick our leader and the direction that this country's going to go. What was President Trump's responsibility? Is his responsibility to America and Americans? And is his job to do what he thinks is best for the people who elected him and those who didn't? From the perspective that we're looking at, we look at the things that he's doing and we say this is terrible and it's taking food off of our table, et cetera. And I honor and respect and appreciate the fact that he said we also have free trade agreements. So I get all of that. But the stance that he's taking, what's your take on his move, the game of chess that he's playing? Should he be thinking about what we think, or should he be doing should he be following through on what he said he's done because he wants to be popular and gain votes and show an America first? That's his America first has really been his sort of, what do you want to call, war cry.
Well, I'm not an American. I don't want to be an American, so it's very difficult for me to give a full objective view on this. I think that the idea, and I'm also going to turn this back at you, right?
Yeah.
Because the idea that President Trump was elected to go back to his first mandate, which he always talked about, when I was president. Well, let me tell you what he did do when he was president. He signed a free trade agreement with Canada. That's his agreement. It's his signature that he's now turned his back on, right? So let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. Would you do business with somebody who's already burned you once?
Absolutely not. And I think that's the point, though, that hasn't been brought up. That's what I'm trying to get at, is I think we're focused on today so much that we've forgotten the conversations from yesterday that sort of lead us to where we are today.
It's sad that he doesn't like the agreement that he signed, but you also see, some absolute, I'll call them exaggerations. If I was speaking to my children, I would probably call them deceit and lies, right? But President Trump's not my child, so I won't put that on him. When you're talking about some of the protections that are inside of that agreement that he signed, that look to, let's say, milk, for an example, because we've heard that one talked about.
Milk, eggs.
Eggs, they're able to send their product here up to a certain point, and then tariffs kick in, which they haven't hit even close to, bringing in that type of product numbers in order for those triggers to take place. And it's funny. I think that we've got to be very careful about what we believe or don't believe that's coming out of all sides, right? Because there are probably some things that need to get fixed for the U.S. And there's probably things that need to get fixed for Canada, right? But to come in and say, you know what, I don't like my signature I gave you 8 years ago. It doesn't exist anymore because I said so. I'm going to use emergency measures to make that case for it. And this is how we're going to do business. That results in not doing business because the Canadian people, I believe, by and large, no longer trust the U.S. government. And I would say that is a very widespread feeling.
Is your sense that this is something that will eventually be forgotten, or is it your sense that this is something that will be remembered as long as Trump is the president?
I think this will be in every history book, every economics book, every business course. I think it'll be taught in every Canadian history course going forward. It's something that we won't forget, because the jobs are one thing, but that's just the start, right? The eventual move is they want Canada to be part of the U.S. We've been there before.
I was going to say, let's bring that conversation
right?
up. Was it 70s or 80s?
1812, War of 1812 to 1814, that was the topic. There was a burned White House, and there was a burned Canadian Parliament, and there was a battle taking place with the support of British troops at that point, essentially Upper Canada, Lower Canada, etc., in a very loose form. And that was a very difficult time, but we chose to be a separate country. And then we chose to be a separate country from the United Kingdom. We've chosen to be Canada, to be Canadians. People are born here, they love being Canadian. People choose to come here, they choose to be Canadian, they love being Canadian. If we wanted to be Americans, we would go south of the border.
This conversation did come up, though. Was it early 80s or late 70s? We did have a referendum here, and your political science and history would be better than mine.
I don't believe we've had a full-on. We've had conversations about, there was the Avro Arrow, and there was how integrated do we want to be with the United States, and how integrated do we want our economy to be in terms of dollars and those things.
America came up as a slogan at one point, though, and I think it might have been in the 80s.
You're
I'm
teaching
older
me
than you,
here.
I know.
You're
but
teaching me.
I do think, I guess what I'm saying is, whether it's 1812 or certainly much more recently, this has been a conversation, and it got to close to 50%. And I'm not the historian, so I don't want to, straight to you folks, I am not the historian. I don't want to pretend to be the historian, but I do remember this. And I was a kid at the time, but I remember the question of, and it was even at our kitchen table, do we want to do this? We're going in an election. We've got just a minute before we got to go. What does Barrie need? What do Canadians need from the perspective of a mayor who's trying to do what's right to and you have been a part of task force, whether it's physician recruitment or whether it's foreign direct investment, whether it's building international trade relationships. 1 minute on who we need in Ottawa.
Well, look, I think that I'm going to stick to local for now, because that's what I know best. I don't know who the candidates are. I'm not even sure if there are candidates, quite frankly, from all the parties yet. But I really do enjoy working with MP Broussard and MP Shipley. I sat around Barrie City Council with both of them. They understand what we as a city have in terms of our fabric, what our needs are, what our concerns are. And so, my personal vote is going to go that direction.
But they've been in opposition, by the way, this entire time.
Yes, since 2015. I sat in that opposition caucus, right, from 2015 to 19. I think the bigger concern is the national question, and what I'm looking to is how are we going to get housing built? How are we seriously going to take on this challenge that we're seeing in terms of tariffs and the American relationship with Canada? And who's going to get serious about getting our products around the world? That's what we should be having a conversation about. That's the national question. How do we insulate ourselves from ever being leveraged like we are right now by any country, including the United States? And that's what I'm looking for.
Well, Mayor Nuttal, listen, I appreciate, first of all, very busy time and very busy schedule, but obviously this has got to be top of mind. I appreciate your being candid. I appreciate your being open. I appreciate your sharing your insights, both personally as well as professionally and civically for us, and just always appreciate you having on this show, and I wish you all the best.
You too. Thanks so much for having me.
Look forward to picking up this conversation with you in the not too distant future. Thanks for watching Barrie City on the Move. We'll see you next time.